Welcome to today's session, whereby we are going to do analysis, especially on the data analysis and results discussion, whereby we are supposed to portray the results of the quantitative analysis undertaken to address the study's research questions on the relationship between adaptability and the quality of life among children in charitable institutions, CCIs, in Kisumu County. Well, the analysis proceeded in 4 stages using IBM SPSS AMOS 23, that is the graphical interface, and the 4 stages include 1. Confirmatory factor analysis CFA of adaptability and quality of life measurable measurement models. 2. A combined measurement model to establish the relationship between the 2 latent constructs. 3. A structural mediation model testing the role of institutional characteristics in the relationship between adaptability and quality of life. And 4. A multi-group structural equation modeling to test the moderating roles of age, nutritional status, placement status. Well, the maximum likelihood estimation was used throughout, with a bias correcting bootstrap confidence intervals of 2000 resamples and a confidence interval of 95% applied to test indirect effects. So starting on with the first one, confirmatory factor analysis, and this time we're going to focus on the adaptability and measurement model. This research was conducted, this analysis was conducted on AMOS graphical interface, and the adaptability construct was initially specified as a single latent factor, as you can see in the diagram, with initial 7 of the observed indicators, which included cultural, work stress, interpersonal, learning, adaptability to uncertainty, creativity, and efficacy to adapt. Well, the initial model ran on 7 variables. As you can see in the diagram here, we only have 6 variables, but the initial one was run against 7 variables, and inspection of standardized factor loadings and modification indices indicated that work stress, which had a lambda of 0.06, and learning, which had a lambda of 0.13, did not load meaningful on the latent factor, while a substantial theoretically coherent residual covariance exists between the 2 cultural and interpersonal indicators, both of which reflect orientation towards understanding of the others. So in the initial 7 indicators, we had work stress, and we had to drop work stress due to the low results. Now on dropping work stress and adding covariances, especially on the errors, as you can see, we have a covariance on the cultural mean and on the interpersonal mean. The mean variables were derived just as a mean of all the cultural questions, for example, or the cultural results, or a mean of all the interpersonal results, or a mean of all the fields. Now, on removing work stress and adding the correlated error, the final model was found to be a very good fit, and subsequently accounting for the correlated residual difference between the cultural and interpersonal really improved it. So the final model retained the 6 indicators, meaning the work stress was removed. Learning was just retained despite a persistently weak and non-significant loading factor, together with all the correlated error terms, yielding an acceptable fit, a CFI of 0.941 and an RMSA of 0.098. Yes, the learning indicator's weak performance of lambda 0.12 was in the final model as noted as a measurement limitation. This results to the final adaptability CFA and standard factor loadings, leading to a model that really fits, especially with the efficacy, creativity, interpersonal, and cultural learning, as from the diagram you can see. We are going to move on to the second model, the second CFA, and this is the quality of life measurement model. The quality of life construct was specified as a single latent factor, just like we did the other one, with 5 indicators corresponding to the kids screen 27 domains administered. What are these domains? The physical activities and health. We have the general mood and feelings, family and free time, friends, school, and learning. Unlike the adaptability model, the QOL measurement model achieved an acceptable fit just on the first try, with no respecification, no covariances, or no models required. As we can see, the model fit produced good variables. The C mean was 2.39, which was the CFI was 0.972, which was above the threshold of 0.9. The TLI was also 0.944, which correlates to a strong fit. So all the indices met and or exceeded conventional thresholds for acceptable fit, and the non-significant p-close test also confirmed that the hypothesis of close fit could also not be rejected. Combined measurement model. This involved the finalized adaptability and QOL measurement models, whereby we first did the two ones. Now we combine them into a single model with the two latent factors permitted to correlate, as hence the double-sided arrow in the middle, in order to establish discriminant validity and provide an initial test association prior to specifying directional structural paths. So the combined model retained an acceptable fits once we run the calculated estimates, whereby we have a CFA of 0.93 and a TLI of 0.909. The latent factor correlation between adaptability and QOL was small, but statistically significant, having an R of 0.192 and a p-path of 0.024. This provides the preliminary support for hypothesis 3 that a significant relationship exists between adaptability and QOL life among CCIs in Kisumu County. So at least we first prove the hypothesis 3 that a significant relationship exists, and this can be done when you calculate the estimates and run and view the text outputs, as you can see. I don't know whether we can do it. Yeah. Let's view the text outputs, as you can see. And yeah, we can see that there's a significant relationship between adaptability and QOL life, proving one of the major hypotheses that we are looking for. Now, we move on to the third section, whereby we have the structural model results. And this time we are testing the mediating role of institutional characteristics. The preliminary model and specification, whereby the fourth research question examining the mediating role of institutional characteristics, which are child caretaker ratio, caregiving training by qualification, frequency of visitation, and also the latest added size of institution, and we also have transition plans in the relationship between adaptability and quality of life. An initial structural model specifying all 5 institution variables as parallel observed mediators produced severely degraded model fit. That is when we encourage parallelization, and extremely large modification in indices ranging from 15 to over 116 among the residual of the 5 institutional variables themselves. Now we had to do a diagnostic inspection, and this indicated that there was an attributed to the nested structure of the data. That is, institutional characteristics are properties of charitable institutions rather than the individual child. And in absence of a retained institution identifier in the dataset, we could not model using multi-level techniques to formally account for the children clustering within the same 35 institutions. What this essentially means is that there's no identifier in the dataset that I was provided for to identify each individual child to a specific institutions among the 35 institutions. Therefore, the 5 mediation variables entered as a separate child level predictors, therefore behaved as a nearly duplicate measure of every single underlying institution dimension. This is documented in the report that will follow this audio session. To produce a statically defensible and interpretable model in this constraint, the 5 institutional variables were converted into or were combined into a single composite index, which, as you can see in the middle here, we've named it as Institutional Character Index, the INST-CHAR index, computed as a mean of the 4 appropriately directed items. We took all the 4 mediators, that is the child caretaker ratio, frequency of visitation, size of institution, and we had to reverse code the size of institution so that the higher values reflect more age-appropriate, privacy-preserving arrangements, and also add on the transition plans. Once we find this mean is when we translate it into institutional character index. Caregiving training by qualification was excluded from the composite as it reflects distinct professional roles such as nurse, social worker, manager, rather than an ordered continuum of caregiving quality, and is reported descriptively rather than a part of the composite mediator. So those are the key variables that I had to twist so that we can get the institute institution character index as one single variable. All this has been attributed due to the lack of an identifier to each and every child amongst the 35 institutions so that we can do clustering. On encouraging this model, the final structured model, the risk-specified structural model with the institutional character index as a single mediating variable between adaptability factor and quality of life factor, produced a good model fit with all the indices indicating and all the structural parts coefficients. So the bootstrap also was run over 2,000 samples with a confidence of 95%, and the results indicated were as shown in the text output, whereby the alpha path, that is the adaptability to the institution character index, was not statistically significant, and the bootstrap confidence intervals for the standardized indirect effect include negative 0.011 to 0.74. On this basis, institutional characteristics were not found to be significantly mediate the relationship between adaptability and QOL. I repeat, on this basis, institutional characteristics were not found to significantly mediate the relationship between adaptability and quality of life. The null hypothesis for hypothesis 4 was therefore retained. Institutional characteristics did, however, demonstrate a significant moderate and negative direct effect on quality of life, independent of adaptability, while adaptability retained a significant positive direct effect on quality of life, even after accounting for institutional characteristics. Therefore, these two constructs therefore appear to operate as an independent, parallel predictors of quality of life rather than a mediational chain. The negative direction of the institutional characters index to quality of life path, in which more structurally favorable institutional characteristics such as better child caretaker ratios and more frequent visitation, age-appropriate accommodation, and stronger transitional planning were associated with a lower report in quality of life, was verified as a substantive finding rather than a coding artifact, reversing the original miscoding of the size of institution items strengthened rather than reversed or weakened the negative association. The plausible explanations for this, and together with recommendations for further investigations, are discussed in the report, as you can see. Now, for the fifth research question, examining whether the relationship between adaptability and quality of life was moderated by demographic characteristics. Consistent with the categorical ordinal three levels, nature of age, nutritional status, and the placement status variable, moderation was tested using multi-group structural equation modeling rather than just latent interaction, that is production term model, which proved statistically unstable owing to high collinearity between the new moderator variables and the derived product terms. For each moderator, an unconstrained model, adaptability to quality of life path 3 to vary across groups was compared against a constraint model, that is, the path is fixed and equal across groups, using a chi-square difference test, and a significant chi-square difference indicates moderation. For example, here we have the age as a moderator, and we have the groups here categorized into middle childhood, early adolescence, and middle adolescent. All of these are categorized into the data and mapped according to the variables that from the data. As you can see in the middle childhood group, we have a grouping variable of age, and the group value is 49, which we've taken the value of 3 and a frequency of 49. So we have middle childhood, all the children are 49. We have early adolescence, which is 122, and middle adolescent, which is 94. So using a multi-group level analysis, we are able to derive these factors. So this was run on all the 4 available factors. We did the same for age, we did the same for nutritional, and we did the same for placement status, generating all the models where we have a multi-group chi-square difference test for moderations. Since we did 3, that is age, nutritional status, and placement status, and each of the 3 we did an unconstrained model and a constrained path model, and we noted the difference and the moderation. So none of the three chi-square difference tests reached statistical significance at the 0.05 level. The adaptability to quality of life path did not differ significantly across the groups, that is across the age groups, nutritional status groups, and placement groups, indicating that none of the three demographic characteristics moderated the relationship between adaptability and quality of life in this sample. Therefore, the null hypothesis for objective 5 or hypothesis 5 was therefore retained for all three demographic moderators tested. The two subgroups, however, if we note, the middle childhood, which had a number of 49 under the age moderator, and also if we look at the placement status, whereby we had a permanent placement status in the other moderator, whereby we had the frequency of 19, produced improper Haywood solutions, evidenced respectively by a standard loading exceeding 1.0 and in an implausible error correlation exceeding plus or negative 0.1. What that basically means is that the frequency variables, that is 19, 49, 7, 11, were too minimum, too different to get a good case value. Hence, we recommend combination of other materials into one so that we can get a frequency status. For example, we can take an example whereby we have nutritional status. It's split into three categories: normal, severe, and I think ordinary. So you might find in the severe case, there are only 4 children which are affected in the severe category. This is considered as a minimal threshold out of the 200 or 365 kids. So we need to recategorize that status. Maybe a suggestion will be setting it to 2 categories, whereby we have the normal nutritional status and we also have the malnourished. The malnourished will combine the 4 severe and the 60, which are usually under severe. So it will be malnourished 64 and normal 201, just as a suggestion to standardize the data. Summary of the hypothesis and testing. Running these 5 significant analyses, running the 4 significant analyses, we generate a hypothesis testing for all the variable fields. So in hypothesis 3, no significant relationship between adaptability and quality of life. We have rejected that. Why? Because we found there's a significant positive relationship found. In hypothesis 4, institutional characteristics have no mediating role. We have retained that hypothesis and we said no significant mediation, that is institutional characteristics, act as an independent direct predictor of quality of life instead. Hypothesis 5, demographic characteristics have no moderating role. This time we have retained also that hypothesis, whereby we agree that the demographic characteristics have no moderating role. There is no significant moderation by any of the 3 demographic characteristics tested. Now, what are the limitations of the analysis? This is what we want to discuss. We noticed 3 limitations arising directly from the analytic process. 1, the learning indicator of the adaptability was retained in the final measurement model, that is in the CFA, despite being weak and statistically non-significant. Removing it in isolation destabilized the model fit at low degrees of freedom without resolving the underlying misfit. Therefore, it was retained. You remember in the first model whereby we only dropped work stress and we later left learning as an indicator of adaptability. So that's one of the limitations of the analysis. The second limitation is the institutional characteristics. That is, as we discussed, the child caretaker ratio, caregiving, training, frequency of visitation, size of institution, and transition plans were recorded at the level of individual child without a retained institutional identifier linking the children to their charitable institution residence. This precluded multi-level modeling to formally test and adjust for clustering of children within the 35 sample institutions, and necessitated the reduction of 5 conceptually distinct institutional variables into a single composite mediator. Future data collection should retain individual institutional level identifier to permit multi-level institutional aggregated analysis from institutional characteristics. Third, Three subgroups arising from the categorical demographic moderators, that is the middle age group, which had a frequency of 49, and the permanent placement status, which had a frequency of 19. And prior to collapsing categories, we also have the severe acute malnutrition, which had a frequency of 4, were too small relative to model complexity and produce stable interpretable parameter estimates within the multi-group framework, evidenced by the Haywood cases in 2 of 3. While the overall moderation test, the chi-square difference comparisons remained valid and interpretable, a larger, more evenly distributed sample across demographic categories will be required to examine with the group structural directly in the future results. So that the third point is basically the frequency of these samples were too low, especially severe acute malnutrition had only a frequency of 4, which is too small relative. So yeah, that is the end of the analysis, and I will send you the report so that you can follow it word by word. But this is just a video to show you the diagrams and how I achieved onto this analysis. Thank you.